They said she was too plain to be a bride. The carpenter said she was exactly right. Agnes Farley had been called plain her entire life, and she had long ago stopped arguing with the word. She was not ugly. She knew this the way she knew the weather, as a fact observed without emotion. Her features were regular. Her teeth were straight. Her hair was brown and clean, and unremarkable. She was neither tall nor short, neither thin nor heavy. She was, in every measurable way, average. The kind of woman who could walk through a room and leave no impression on anyone in it. The kind of woman whose face strangers forgot before the door closed behind her. In Baltimore, where she had spent 27 years, this had been a quiet disadvantage. The reason she was not invited to dances, not courted by the young men at church, not included in the whispered conversations about engagements and weddings that occupied the other women at the garment factory, where she worked 12 hours a day, stitching collars onto shirts. In Baltimore, plainness was a sentence served in silence. On the frontier, she had been told, things were different. Men out west needed wives, and wives were scarce, and a woman who could cook and sew and keep a house could find a husband regardless of her face. This was the promise of the matrimonial advertisements she had found in the back pages of the Herald, neatly worded appeals from ranchers and farmers and miners who wanted helpmeets, not beauties, and who promised steady homes and honest labor and the simple dignity of being wanted. She had answered 3 advertisements. The first man never wrote back. The second sent a letter so crude she burned it in the stove. The third, a man named Whitaker, a cattle dealer in Clearwater, Nebraska, had sent a polite, businesslike response and a train ticket, and Agnes had packed her cardboard trunk, quit the garment factory, and ridden west with the stubborn, terrified hope of a woman who had decided that anything was better than one more year of stitching collars in silence. Whitaker was waiting at the depot when the train pulled into Clearwater. He was a heavy-set man in his 40s, with a waxed mustache and a vest that strained across his belly, and he looked at Agnes the way a buyer looks at livestock that has arrived in worse condition than advertised. "You're Miss Farley," he said. It was not a question. It was a diagnosis. "I am." He walked around her, actually walked around her, circling the spot where she stood on the depot platform with her trunk at her feet, examining her from every angle, with the frank, unself-conscious appraisal of a man accustomed to inspecting goods. "Your letters were well written," he said finally, as if this were the only positive thing he could find to say. "Thank you. I expected, well," he tugged at his mustache. "The thing is, Miss Farley, I have a certain standing in this town. A man in my position needs a wife who, how to put this, makes an impression." Agnes felt the words land like stones dropped into still water. She had heard variations of this speech before, from the dance partners who never asked twice, from the boys at church who looked past her, to the prettier girls behind, from her own mother, who had once said, with the practical cruelty of a woman who loved her daughter, but could not protect her from the truth, "Agnes, you will need to be useful, because you will never be ornamental." "You're saying I'm too plain," Agnes said. Whitaker had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I'm saying we might not be suited. We might not be suited." She repeated the words the way you repeat a phrase in a language you are learning, carefully, testing the shape of it. "You brought me 1,100 miles to tell me we're not suited. I'll pay for your return ticket, of course." Of course. He gave her money for the hotel and told her the eastbound train left at noon the following day. Then he tipped his hat, actually tipped his hat, as if politeness could retroactively improve the cruelty of what he had just done, and walked away down the platform. Agnes stood at the depot with her trunk and her carpet bag, and the 1,100-mile distance between herself and everything she had left behind, and she did not cry. She had stopped crying over the opinions of men a long time ago. Crying required the belief that the opinion might be wrong, and she had learned, slowly, thoroughly, the way you learn anything you practice daily, to accept that plainness was a fixed condition, like the color of her eyes or the length of her fingers. It was not something she could change. It was something she had to work around. She picked up her trunk and walked to the hotel. It was a 2-story frame building on the main street of Clearwater, with a front desk staffed by a woman named Mrs. Oates, who looked at Agnes with the sharp, knowing eyes of someone who had seen rejected brides before. "Whitaker?" Mrs. Oates said. "Yes. You're the third one this year." Mrs. Oates handed her a key. "Room 4, top of the stairs. Supper's at 6. Agnes carried her trunk upstairs and sat on the edge of the narrow bed and looked at the wall. She had exactly $14, a return train ticket, and no plan. Going back to Baltimore meant going back to the factory, to the collars, to the silence. Staying meant she did not know what staying meant. She had no money, no connections, no prospects in a town that apparently used up mail-order brides the way it used up fence posts. She allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to consider the possibility that this was all she would ever be. A woman too plain for a cattle dealer in Nebraska, too plain for the boys in Baltimore, too plain for the life she had imagined on the long train ride west, while the prairies unrolled outside the window like a promise being written in grass and sky. She let the feeling sit. Then she folded it the way she folded fabric, neatly, precisely, along the existing crease, and put it away. She washed her face. She straightened her hair. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the basin and saw what she always saw, a face that was neither beautiful nor ugly, a face that committed no offense and inspired no devotion, a face that had carried her through 27 years of the world's indifference, with its dignity intact. "All right," she said to the mirror. "All right." She went down to supper because she had paid for it, and because hunger was more immediate than despair. The dining room held 4 tables, 3 of them empty. At the 4th sat a man eating soup. He was perhaps 30, with light brown hair and a clean-shaven face, and the large, scarred hands of someone who worked with tools. He wore a plain shirt, no vest, no watch chain, no adornment of any kind. When Agnes sat down at the table beside his, he glanced up, nodded once, and went back to his soup. She ate the meal Mrs. Oates brought, boiled beef, potatoes, bread, in silence. The man at the next table ate in silence as well. It was a comfortable silence, the kind shared by 2 people who were accustomed to eating alone and did not feel the need to perform sociability for each other's benefit. When he finished, he stood, placed coins on the table, and paused at her table on his way out. "You just come in on the train?" he asked. "Yes." "Whitaker's?" She looked at him. His expression was neutral, not pitying, not amused, not curious, just a man asking a question. "Mrs. Oates told you," she said. "Mrs. Oates tells everyone everything. It's her primary occupation." He extended his hand. "Josiah Crane. I build things. Agnes Farley. I sew things." The corner of his mouth moved slightly. "Nice to meet you, Miss Farley." He left. She finished her supper and went to bed and lay awake for a long time, thinking about nothing in particular and everything at once. In the morning, she walked the town. Clearwater was larger than she had expected. A real street with real buildings, a mercantile, a church, a schoolhouse, a livery stable, and at the far end of Main Street, a carpenter's workshop with the door standing open and the sound of a plane moving across wood coming from inside. She stopped at the door. Josiah Crane was at a workbench, shaping a board with long, even strokes. Shavings curled from the plane and fell to the floor in pale ribbons. He worked with a concentration that was almost meditative, his entire being focused on the point where the blade met the wood. "Mr. Crane," she said. He looked up. "Miss Farley, you're still here. The train doesn't leave until noon. And you're walking the town instead of sitting in the hotel. I wanted to see it, before I leave." He set down the plane. He looked at her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling sensation that he was seeing something the other men in her life had not bothered to look for. "Do you want to leave?" he asked. The question caught her off guard, not because it was inappropriate, but because no one had asked it. Not Whitaker, who had assumed she would go. Not Mrs. Oates, who had assumed the same. Not Agnes herself, who had been so busy accepting the rejection that she had not paused to consider whether acceptance was the only possible response. "I don't know," she said, and the honesty of it surprised her. He nodded. He picked up the plane and went back to his board. "I need a sign painted for the shop," he said, not looking at her. Mrs. Oates says you have a fine hand. I'd pay $2 and a meal. Mrs. Oates says a great deal. She does. Is she wrong about the handwriting? Agnes looked at him, at his scarred hands and his clean shirt and his face, which was as plain as her own, and seemed entirely unbothered by the fact. And something shifted inside her. Not hope exactly, more like the possibility of hope. The small, tentative suggestion that the world might contain a place where plainness was not a disqualification, but simply a fact, acknowledged and set aside in favor of what mattered. She's not wrong, Agnes said. She missed the noon train. She did not realize it until 3 o'clock, when she heard the whistle as the eastbound pulled away from the depot. She was sitting on a stool in Josiah's workshop with a paintbrush in her hand and the smell of turpentine in her nose, and the sound of the train that was supposed to carry her back to Baltimore, back to the collars, back to the silence, faded into the distance, and she felt nothing. Not panic, not regret. Just the quiet confirmation that something had already been decided, even if she had not yet found the words for it. She painted the sign. It took the rest of the morning. Careful black letters on a white board, Crane Carpentry, with a small drawing of a hand plane in the corner that she added without being asked. Josiah watched her work with the same focused attention he gave to his own, and when she finished, he hung the sign above the door and stood back and looked at it. "That's good work," he said. "Thank you. I also need shelves built for the mercantile. I don't have time to paint them. If you want to stay a few more days, I could use the help." The shelves took 3 days. After the shelves, there was a set of chairs for the schoolhouse that needed painting. After the chairs, there was a church pew that needed refinishing. Each job led to the next, and each day Agnes spent in Clearwater, the distance between herself and Baltimore grew wider, and the train ticket in her pocket grew less and less like an escape route, and more like something she no longer needed. She rented a room above the mercantile. She took in sewing, the skill she had brought from Baltimore, and within a month, she had more work than she could handle. The women of Clearwater, it turned out, had been mending their own clothes with varying degrees of success for years, and the arrival of a woman who could set a sleeve and tailor a bodice with professional precision was greeted with the enthusiasm usually reserved for the arrival of a new preacher or a shipment of sugar. Mrs. Oates was the first to say it. She appeared at Agnes's door one afternoon with a dress that needed letting out and an opinion that needed letting out even more. "Whitaker's new bride arrived last week," she said, settling herself in the chair by the window with the air of a woman about to deliver important news. "Pretty girl from St. Louis. Can't cook, can't sew, cries when the wind blows. He looks like a man who has purchased a very expensive horse and discovered it won't pull a plow." Agnes said nothing. She pinned the seam and began to stitch. "You, on the other hand," Mrs. Oates continued, watching her work, "have more business than any dressmaker between here and Omaha. You've got the best sign in town hanging over a shop that isn't even yours. And every woman in Clearwater thinks you're the most useful person who's arrived here in 10 years. She paused. "I'd say you came out ahead." Agnes almost smiled. Almost. She and Josiah fell into a routine. She painted his work. He built her a sewing table. She brought him lunch when he forgot to eat. He walked her home in the evenings when the work ran late. They talked, not the urgent, performative talk of courtship, but the slow, comfortable talk of two people who were building something without naming it. He told her about the farm he had grown up on in Ohio, about his apprenticeship with a furniture maker in Cincinnati, about his decision to come west because he wanted to build things that mattered: houses, barns, churches, not parlor tables for people who already had too many tables. She told him about the garment factory, about the collars, about the years of invisible labor that had funded her train ticket west. One evening in October, they were sitting on the bench outside his workshop, watching the sun go down over the prairie. The sky was enormous, the way it always was, and the light was gold and warm, and somewhere down the street someone was playing a harmonica. "Josiah," she said. Whitaker said I was too plain. Whitaker's an idiot. He's not entirely wrong. I am plain." Josiah turned to her. His face, that plain, unadorned, deeply honest face, held an expression she had never seen directed at her before. Not the pitying look she was accustomed to, not the blank indifference of strangers, but something warm and specific, and wholly intentional. "Agnes," he said, "I build things for a living. I spend every day looking at wood, at grain and color, and the way light falls across a surface. And I can tell you that the most beautiful piece of wood I've ever worked with was a piece of walnut that looked like nothing when I pulled it off the pile. No figure, no flash, nothing to catch the eye. But when I planed it down and sanded it smooth and put a coat of oil on it, it was the richest, warmest, most alive piece of wood I've ever seen." He paused. "You're not plain, Agnes. You're just unsanded." She looked at him, and something broke open in her chest. Not the sharp crack of heartbreak, but the slow, spreading warmth of something finally fitting into place. She had spent 27 years being told what she was not. No one had ever told her what she was. She reached over and took his hand. It was rough and scarred and warm, and his fingers closed around hers with a certainty that needed no words. "Exactly right," she said. "What?" "You said I was exactly right. At the depot, in your head, before you ever said it out loud. I could see it." He looked at her with those steady, honest eyes. "I thought it before you even sat down for supper," he said. "I just needed time to find the words." The harmonica played on. The sun went down, and Agnes Farley, plain, unremarkable, invisible Agnes Farley, sat on a bench in Clearwater, Nebraska, holding the hand of a carpenter who built things that mattered. And she was, for the first time in her life, exactly where she belonged.